So less than roughly 7 hours away from Donald Trump's historic second inauguration, what can we expect? Julia Manchester is a political reporter with The Hill and will be braving the frost today, and she joins me now. Julia, good to have you with us. Now, before the inauguration even takes place, there was this massive party. We just saw the scenes there the night before with the likes of Kid Rock and Village People. What's the vibe in DC ahead of this morning's proceedings?
Yeah, good evening to you in Australia. Look, I think the vibe is very different from what it was 8 years ago. 8 years ago, I think Washington, D.C. itself, which is very, a Democratic stronghold, very liberal, was in shock that Donald Trump was elected. Like much of the country, I don't think Donald Trump himself thought he would be elected. There was much more of a resistance against President-elect Trump. You had that Women's March, which brought thousands of women to Washington, D.C. and protesters, and really you saw numerous others take place across the world. This time around, it seems like the resistance is much more muted. You still have protests. On Saturday, there was the People's March, which took place here in Washington, D.C. But I would say that overall, it's not as anti-Trump. You have people like Mark Zuckerberg, for example, people who used to be very critical of President-elect Trump coming to his inauguration. You have fashion designers like Oscar de la Renta publicly talking about how they dressed Ivanka Trump for much of the weekend's events, as well as J.D. Vance's wife, future Second Lady Usha Vance. So it certainly is a different vibe change, or a different vibe than 8 years ago.
Yes, can you explain to us, we know that this will be held indoors. How does that change things as far as presidential inauguration is concerned?
Well, it's not the first time we've seen an inauguration held indoors. The last one held indoors was 40 years ago in 1985 when President Ronald Reagan was sworn in the U.S. Capitol. So this will take place in the Capitol building. Maybe some of your viewers will remember a few weeks ago, Jimmy Carter, the former president, was lying in state in the Capitol building. It will take place in that room, which is a dome. We're expecting, between 600 and 700 people to be present in that room. But there's a lot of questions as to who will get in there and see it in person. Look, it's going to be much more scaled down. You can't have the throngs of people who have traveled here to Washington, D.C. to witness it in person. It will likely be President Trump's staff, a select number of his supporters, foreign dignitaries, special guests, members of Congress. But it's going to be scaled down. It'll take place in that building. We are anticipating that President-elect Trump will sign executive orders just moments after he pops down from that podium at the Capitol Dome. And then even the parade itself, the inauguration parade, will be scaled back. There will be a celebration of sorts at Capital One Arena, which is where the rally was held last night.
Yes, so much smaller crowds, I suppose, in D.C. itself, given, again, going back to the first Trump inauguration, the controversy over attendance numbers the last time this happened.
Yeah, well, in a way, President-elect Trump doesn't have to worry about that this time around because he can only fit so many people in that building. But I'm sure he will be talking about the crowds watching from inside the arena, despite the fact that a lot of these people won't be able to witness it in person. Thousands of, supporters have traveled to Washington, D.C., walking around downtown D.C. You are seeing more Make America Great Again hats than you normally see. There's definitely a different crowd here. So, people are still here. They're just going to be experiencing it in a different way.
Yes, and you spoke of Donald Trump saying that he's going to get right to work straight after his inauguration, and of those 200 plus or so executive orders that he's going to sign. What might some of these executive orders be?
Well, we understand that a lot of them will focus on immigration as well as energy and environment. So with energy and environment, for example, there will be an executive order to pull the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accords. On immigration, you will really start to see the president-elect or future president really start to implement some of those policies. He won't be able to fully shut down the border or anything to that effect. And there are some things that he needs on immigration congressional approval on. He needs cooperation from states themselves and state governments. But he will begin to tackle those issues really within minutes of becoming president.
Yes, and would day one also mean that TikTok is back in business?
So TikTok has been back in business here in the US for roughly a day. It was interesting. On Saturday night here, around 9:30, 10 o'clock, users started opening up the TikTok app and they saw a message saying TikTok was no longer available. Then on Sunday, you would open the app and say TikTok was available because President Trump was working with the company. So we know that the app is available now. Users in the US can use it, but we know that President-elect Trump has been working with TikTok CEO, the owner, ByteDance's CEO, the parent company, to work on a 90-day extension. There has been some pushback to this move, including from some of President-elect Trump's most staunch supporters in Congress, including Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas. So the next 90 days will be interesting. But what's interesting, too, is that TikTok CEO will be in attendance at today's inauguration.
Yes, and Julia, what's really piqued my interest as well is Donald Trump's incoming Hollywood ambassadors. We saw Jon Voight at his rally earlier, but they also include Mel Gibson and Sylvester Stallone. Exactly what will they be doing?
Look, they'll be at a number of these events. I don't think they'll be taking center stage, obviously, at the ceremony itself, but they'll be around. They'll be at these events. It's fascinating because we do know that a lot of Hollywood does tend to lean to the left politically. So, in no way are we seeing a throng of Hollywood stars coming out to support the president. But particularly with Jon Voight, these are longtime supporters of the president-elect, coming out to support him. Mel Gibson and Sylvester Stallone are certainly interesting additions to that crowd.
Okay, Julia Manchester, always great to chat in what's going to be a really interesting 4 years. Thank you so much.
Thank you.